The Trump administration is reportedly planning a major shakeup among senior leaders in immigration and customs enforcement. The New York Times reports that while plans are not yet finalized, the proposal stems from frustrations from Donald Trump and within the Department of Homeland Security over the pace of deportations, which are lagging behind the president's goal of more than 1 million by the end of the year of his first year back in office. The Times cites 3 people familiar with the plans. Meanwhile, immigration enforcement in cities like Chicago is becoming increasingly more aggressive, with ICE officials defending the use of tear gas on protesters in court this week. Joining us now, Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon of Pennsylvania, who just returned from Chicago herself. Congresswoman, welcome to the weekend. So please tell us more about your visit to Chicago. What did you see? And more importantly, what did you hear from the people there?
Well, thank you so much for having me on this. I think this is a really important story. And what we saw and heard in Chicago was really shocking. I went out there. We had 19 members of Congress go out to Chicago to have field hearings. We were doing this because Congress under Mike Johnson is not in session. And it's our job to go and investigate what is happening under this government. So what we did find was chaos and fear and lawlessness. But that chaos, fear, and lawlessness was being brought by armed and masked federal agents.
Congresswoman, can you expound a little bit on that? I know, there was
Sure.
a priest who was present at one of these shadow hearings that you had who had been a victim or I think hit by
Pepper ball.
Yeah, by these ICE agents.
Pepper
Who
balls.
else did you hear from? Can you go a little bit more into
Sure.
the details specifically?
Sure. We had multiple roundtables and a hearing, and we heard from community members. So we heard from a number of young people, people in their teens who had parents who had been snatched off the streets, been picked up while dropping their children off at daycare or school, or had been taken from their workplaces or just ripped out of their cars and their cars left on the street. So now we have young people who are trying to take care of their families and fill the gap left by a parent who has been disappeared into this ICE system that is far from transparent and is not providing due process. We heard from citizens who have been detained. The day before we arrived, ICE had picked up 2 16-year-olds, at least one of whom was a citizen, on their way to school, and picked them up, detained them, and then just released them with no charges because there were no charges to bring. We heard from teachers and school social workers and PTA members about the challenges of trying to keep kids safe and trying to allay their fears when you have ICE agents running amok in the streets, masked and armed men. They have had multiple car chases or traffic stops where ICE agents have rammed people's cars, people who they weren't even pursuing. There just was this overlay of fear in the city, which I understand is probably part of what ICE and Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller are trying to do here. But it's the sadistic cruelty of racists and bigots and bullies trying to impose their will on a city, and the courts are not having it. We heard an awful lot about the fact that despite what the ICE agents and CBP are claiming out there, when they have to go to court, when they actually have to produce facts, they're unable to do so. So we have courts being increasingly skeptical of the lies that are coming from this administration about whether or not there's rebellion in the streets and whether or not the people they are detaining are dangerous or had resisted. While we were there, Bovino, the Customs and Border Patrol officer who's been in charge of some of the most outrageous raids in Los Angeles and now in Chicago, he was filmed lobbing tear gas canisters into a crowd, and there were allegations, and I think there's a recording of him saying to someone who was recording what was going on, "What, are you threatening me?" So deliberately trying to provoke a confrontation.
Congresswoman, our sister show, The Weekend Primetime last night, had exclusive video of, agents kind of busting through, allegedly, through someone's private home to try to get someone. We've seen, Black Hawk helicopters with people rappelling down in neighborhoods with, young children and women coming outside in their sleeping clothes or butt naked. And I'm curious what you gleaned from the community about what it's like to be, how does it change the psyche of people where they constantly feel like they are under threat when they are seeing what's happening to their neighbors? Because our immigration process, while broken for a very long time, there used to be a kind of a rhyme and reason to it, right? People can expect if you act this way, then you're probably safe as long as you do these certain things. Now it's the wild, wild west. How does it change the psyche of a community for this to happen?
Well, that's what was so chilling, is the chilling effect on the whole community. In fact, I think one of the Chicago Tribune had a front page headline, "Chilling Impact on Business." We spoke to folks in the community who talked about the 30% reduction in street traffic in small businesses. When we talked to, the school community, the principals and the teachers who are trying to help children be safe and be able to learn, they talked about the children with separation anxiety who are afraid to go to school, whole communities that are afraid to go to school, afraid to go to work, afraid to go to court to pursue their legal asylum claims. You just see this disruption of everyday life. We heard about people who haven't left their homes since the onset of this Operation Midway, or whatever stupid name they're calling it. It's been 5 weeks, and they're afraid to get groceries. They're afraid to go get prescription drugs, go to their doctor's visits. We heard about one community agency that every year holds a mammogram clinic. And last year they had 50 people sign up, and this year 0. It is just this imposition of fear on a community with outright lawless behavior, and it impacts not just folks who might be undocumented, because this administration is not just picking up undocumented immigrants. It's picking up people who have legitimate asylum claims and are trying to pursue them. It's picking up citizens. We heard last week of 170 documented citizen pickups, and we heard about more when we were there, because if you are operating in a lawless manner, if you don't provide due process, who is to say whether the person you pick up is a citizen or not, a criminal or not, or just someone who is protesting this lawless behavior with their First Amendment rights?
Pennsylvania Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon with very important stories from her trip to Chicago. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
What we've just heard is more than a policy debate. It's a human story unfolding in real time. A story of fear, confusion, and deep division in American communities. As Congresswoman Scanlon described, what's happening on the streets of Chicago and across other cities is not simply about immigration enforcement. It's about the kind of country America is becoming, when citizens, families, and even children live in fear of sudden raids, when due process becomes an afterthought, and when the rule of law feels replaced by rule through fear. We must ask, where do we draw the line? In just a few years, the tone of immigration enforcement has shifted from bureaucratic control to militarised spectacle. Tear gas, unmarked agents, helicopters and door-to-door raids. These are not scenes from a war zone abroad. They are images from American neighbourhoods. And regardless of where one stands politically, it's impossible to ignore the toll this takes on trust. Trust between citizens and government, between neighbours and even within families. What stands out most from this report is the psychological cost. We heard about parents afraid to take their children to school, workers terrified to go to their jobs, and small business owners watching their livelihoods collapse because their customers no longer feel safe to walk the streets. Fear doesn't just silence people, it reshapes entire communities. And here lies the heart of the issue. When fear becomes a governing strategy, democracy itself begins to erode. Policies designed to protect the nation can, if abused, turn inward and harm the very citizens they claim to defend. That's what makes this so complex. This isn't simply a partisan clash over immigration numbers. It's a moral reckoning about justice, compassion, and accountability. We also can't overlook the broader implications. Aggressive enforcement without transparency breeds resentment, and resentment, history tells us, never stays contained. It spreads through communities, through generations, creating wounds that take decades to heal. For many Americans watching this unfold, the question isn't just about legality, it's about identity. What does it mean to live in a country where people can vanish from their homes or workplaces under the shadow of authority? Yet amidst this chaos, there's also courage. The witnesses who spoke up, the journalists covering these stories, the teachers and community leaders trying to keep children safe, they represent the resilience of democracy. Because even in fear, voices still rise, and that is something worth holding on to. So tonight, as we close, I'll leave you with this. How should a nation balance security with humanity? How far can enforcement go before it begins to fracture the moral foundation it stands upon? And most importantly, what kind of country do we want to be remembered as in this moment of history? These are not easy questions, but they're necessary ones. Because silence, too, is a choice. And in times like these, it's one we can't afford to make. If you found this report insightful, don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more real, fact-based news commentary.